It's a horrible disease.
Paul Alexander of Dallas,
78-year-old Paul Alexander,
has died at the age of 78.
Have you ever heard of a man who spent 72 years of his life inside an iron capsule? What if we told you this man couldn't even breathe without the capsule, yet became a lawyer winning cases in courtrooms? But beyond that, this man has a life story that will leave you breathless, a struggle for survival that began when he faced death at age 6 and inspired the entire world. Paul Alexander was born in Dallas in 1946. Growing up with his two brothers in an ordinary American family, Paul's life would change completely in July 1952. That day, 6-year-old Paul was playing in the yard with his brothers when he suddenly began feeling sick. His head and neck ached, his stomach was nauseous, and he had a high fever. Seeing his flushed cheeks, his mother knew deep down what they were dealing with. 1952 was America's largest polio outbreak in history. This disease, which started with flu-like symptoms, infected approximately 58,000 people nationwide during that period, mostly affecting children, leaving some disabled and causing many deaths. Paul spent that day in bed, coloring in his coloring books. "Mom, I don't feel good," he had complained to his mother. When the family doctor said he'd most likely caught the polio virus, he recommended staying home since hospitals were overcrowded with patients. However, over the next few days, Paul's condition rapidly deteriorated. In just 5 days, he lost all motor functions. He could no longer hold a crayon, move, speak, or swallow. The family rushed their child to the hospital. When Paul arrived at the hospital, he found himself at the center of a battle against a merciless disease. Hospitals were overflowing with polio patients. The first doctor told his family there was nothing to be done and left him to die. The small child was struggling to breathe on the stretcher. The polio virus had attacked the motor neurons in the spinal cord, disrupting communication between the central nervous system and muscles. The muscles were now too weak to allow the person to breathe independently. If another doctor hadn't decided to examine him again, he probably would have died. This doctor thought there might still be a chance and immediately took him to surgery. He performed a tracheostomy operation to clear the blockage in his lungs. When Paul woke up 3 days later, he was inside a narrow metal machine with only his head outside. This felt like being buried alive. For a moment, he thought he was dead, but he wasn't. He had survived a severe polio attack, but the disease had left everything below his neck completely paralyzed. When he tried to call for help, he realized he couldn't make a sound. Since the paralysis also affected the diaphragm responsible for breathing, he could no longer breathe normally. What his diaphragm couldn't do, this machine now did. This was called an iron lung. When respiratory muscles were paralyzed, it forced the lungs to expand and contract through negative pressure created around the chest, allowing the person to breathe. It was a common treatment method during the polio epidemics of the 1940s and 1950s. When Paul woke up, he saw other children connected to giant respiratory devices around him. Although he couldn't speak due to the hole in his throat, he could hear the screams of children in pain. The next 18 months were pure torture. Since he could barely leave the iron lung, when nurses took him out for washing or bathroom needs, he had to hold his breath. Most of the time, he couldn't hold his breath long and would pass out. As months passed, he tried to communicate with other children through facial expressions, but none of his new friendships lasted long. Every time he made a friend, they died. Why was I making friends? They all died. Why was I alive? He wondered. Paul's situation wasn't very bright either. In the doctor's eyes, his chance of recovery was nearly zero. During rounds, comments about him like, "He'll die today," or "He shouldn't be alive," both angered him and strengthened his will to live. After 18 months, his parents wanted to take their son home from the hospital. They rented a truck and generator to bring Paul and the iron lung home. The reason he was allowed to leave the hospital was that no one expected him to live much longer. But Paul didn't die. Despite the challenges ahead, he refused to give in to despair and began speaking and breathing better with the help of the iron lung. The whole family slept in the same living room with him. They were always half awake in case the machine's sound stopped. In 1954, when Paul was 8, his mother received a call from a charity working against polio. A physical therapist named Mrs. Sullivan wanted to help them. Sullivan taught him breathing exercises using a technique called frog breathing. This method involved deliberately compressing air into the mouth and throat cavity and pushing it into the windpipe and lungs using tongue movements. Paul was swallowing air rather than breathing. Sullivan told him if he could do this for 3 minutes, she'd get him a puppy. It took him a full year to learn this, but he finally got his dog, which he named Ginger. Now he could leave the iron lung for short periods. When he could breathe long enough, he began going out to the porch first, then to the yard. Since he couldn't breathe while unconscious, he continued sleeping in the iron lung every night. Paul's education had been interrupted in the hospital. His mother began homeschooling him. It took over a year for his family to convince the school system. At 13, he became one of the first students enrolled in the region's home education program. His first writing tool was a straight stick with a pencil attached that his father made for him. Over time, his father prepared various sticks for him. He used these for writing, drawing, and typing. As his self-confidence increased, he began spending increasingly longer periods outside the iron lung. Most days, he would leave the lung at school dismissal time and wait for his friends in his wheelchair. Friends would take him around the streets, to restaurants, and to movies. Paul graduated from high school with outstanding success at age 21. He applied to universities but was repeatedly rejected due to his disability. He never gave up and finally convinced them. He was accepted with 2 conditions: having the polio vaccine and finding an assistant. Paul became a university student. At school, he met and fell in love with someone named Claire. But when he called his girlfriend one day, her mother, who opposed the relationship, answered and told him never to speak to her daughter again. "It took me years to heal those wounds," Paul said. He transferred to the University of Texas in Austin. He moved into a dorm and hired a caregiver. In 1984, he graduated with a law degree. 2 years later, he passed the bar exam and officially became a lawyer. This was a huge achievement for someone living within the confines of an iron lung. For the next 10 years, he practiced law in Dallas. He represented his clients in court wearing a 3-piece suit and wheelchair. In the 1960s, iron lungs gave way to new devices. You might wonder why Paul didn't use a modern device. He had adapted to the iron lung both psychologically and physically. His chest muscles were too damaged to use other machines. In 2015, the iron lung seals broke and began leaking air. Since the machines were rare, finding a replacement was difficult. After a friend posted a help video on YouTube, engineer Brady Richards, who lived in the same city, gave him a refurbished iron lung. In 2020, Paul published his book, 3 Minutes for a Dog: My Life in an Iron Lung. The book's title was inspired by the therapist who promised him a dog if he could breathe for 3 minutes. He wrote the book, which took 8 years, with his mouth using a stick on the keyboard. Katie Gaines had been his caregiver for about 30 years. She helped him shave, organize his affairs, cook meals. Despite Paul's desire for independence, his life depended on caregivers, the iron lung, and electricity. In 2022, Paul was recognized by Guinness World Records as the person who lived the longest in an iron lung for using the iron lung for 70 years. As he aged, his endurance decreased and he had difficulty breathing outside the lung. No one expected someone needing an iron lung to live this long. After surviving one deadly epidemic, he found himself under the threat of another. In 2024, at age 78, he caught COVID-19. Although he was able to return home after going to the hospital, he remained quite weak and showed signs of confusion. A few weeks later, on March 11, 2024, Paul Alexander passed away. Thanks to vaccination efforts, no new polio cases have been seen in America since 1979. However, the virus still exists in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Paul Alexander's story wasn't just about surviving, but also about thriving and making a difference. This man, who spent 72 years in an iron capsule, showed the entire world that even the most challenging conditions can be overcome with determination and a positive outlook. If Paul Alexander's incredible story inspired you, don't forget to hit that like button. If you're not already subscribed, subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos about amazing real-life stories. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this story. I'll see you in the next video.